Okay, so this video is going to have day 14 and day 15 in it. So if you need day 15, you can just kind of scoot ahead a little bit on this one, and that'll work out just fine for you on doing that one. Okay, so let's talk about parallelograms. So parallelograms are kind of the foundation for all of our quadrilaterals. That's four-sided figures. By definition, a parallelogram is a quadrilateral four-sided figure with both pairs of opposite sides parallel. That's what a parallelogram is. Let's talk properties of a parallelogram. So if a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then its opposite sides are congruent. Now we're going to have to correct here. We got a little bit of a typo. So we need to kind of erase this out of there. So on your paper, kind of scratch that out a little bit. And we're going to have PQ is congruent to SR. So I need you to write that on your paper. You also need to draw yourself a picture. So let's draw a picture of a parallelogram. Typically, parallelograms are drawn kind of like slanty looking rectangle shapes. And that's so that you don't think the angles are 90. So I've got Q, I've got P, I've got S, and I've got R over here. Now, let's talk about those relationships. So it said that opposite sides are congruent. So that means this side's congruent to this side, and this one's congruent to that one. The next property we have is that if something's a quadrilateral and it's a parallelogram, then the opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. So let's mark those as being congruent as well. Please notice that the two acute angles are equal and the two obtuse angles are equal. Okay, sliding on down here a little bit. This one says consecutive angles are supplementary if you have a parallelogram. So what that means is that if I take these two angles, one acute, one obtuse, and I add them, they add up to be 180. I can also go this direction, adds up to 180, this direction 180, or this direction 180, and all of those angles are written down here. So that means you would add them up to 180. Our last one we have is if a parallelogram has one right angle, then it has four right angles. So using the properties we already know, if this is a 90-degree angle, that one must be a 90-degree angle. Consecutive angles have to be supplementary, so if this one is 90, that one's 90, and the angles opposite each other would also be 90, so that would give you all four. Make sure you memorize these four properties of parallelograms. Now let's talk about diagonals. So these are a little bit trickier, but not really a whole lot trickier, just a little bit. So this one says that if your quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then the diagonals bisect each other. Let's draw on our picture. So that would mean that this piece is congruent to this one, and this piece is congruent to this one. So those are equal, which will allow you to make equality statements. The last element we have is that if your parallelogram has diagonals that are bisecting each other, you end up with two congruent triangles. Now, those are pairs. So the pair that are opposite each other this way are equal, and the top and bottom ones are equal. So top and bottom, left and right. Now, how do I know that? Because using side, 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 I can say that these two triangles are equal. Look at this. They have a 1, 2, 3 and a 1, 2, 3. These two sides are also equal. And this has a 1, 2, 4. So that's how those are going to be equal. Again, side, side, side. So here are the triangles that we're talking about. Let's go try some algebra problems with them. Okay, first let's try an angle problem. So I know this angle is 90 degrees. I also know this one's 90 degrees because consecutive angles are supplementary. I also know that this one's 90 degrees because opposite angles are congruent. So I can say 3x equals 90. So x equals 30 degrees. I can also say that 4y equals 90. So y equals 22.5 degrees. So there's an angle problem for you. Let's try a side problem. So get down to number 3. You'll notice that all of those sides are congruent, which means I can say 6x equals 12. I can also say 3y equals 12 because congruent means congruent. So x must be equal to 2 and y must be equal to 4. So there was a side problem. Let's try another angle problem. So hopefully you're looking at these going, oh yeah, diagonals form congruent triangles. But let's talk about this. This is a parallelogram. So you can use alternate interior angles. And now if you look at either the top triangle or the bottom triangle, doesn't matter which one, you know 2 out of the 3 sides. So I'm going to add up 60 and 55 together. And I get 115. So I know 2y plus 115 degrees has to be equal to 180. Remember, there's 180 degrees in a triangle. I also know that 5x plus 115 degrees equals 180. That's your top triangle. And you're going to solve both of those out. So it turns out that my x comes out to be 13 degrees. And my y comes out to be, unfortunately, a decimal, which I'm going to round off, 32.5 degrees. So notice decimals are possible. Let's flip to our next page. Let's try one up here at the top real quickly. Let's pick this one. So I know those are diagonals. They bisect each other. So I know that 3x equals 12. I also know that 4y equals 8. So x equals 4 and y equals 2. All right, so that's kind of your basic problems. Let's talk about conditions for parallelograms. So this side has words, this side has symbols, okay? Words, symbols. So if I want to show something's a parallelogram, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options. Option 1, both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. That's what that looks like as a symbol with this picture. Both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. That's what that looks like as symbols. Both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. Here's what that looks like. Diagonals bisect each other. And here's my weird one. So I'm going to ask you to put a little star next to it on your paper. One pair of opposite sides is both congruent and parallel. So the and is really important. It has to be the same sides. So if I were looking at this picture that's up here, this side would have to be marked both parallel and it would have to be marked congruent. So both things have to happen for that to work. Let's go do just a couple more example problems down here. All right, so I know this is a parallelogram, which means opposite sides are equal. So I'm going to say 2x minus 2 is got to be equal to 12. I'm going to say that 2y has to be equal to 8. So that means that my x comes out to be 7. And my y comes out to be 4. Okay, let's try one with angles because we just did a side. Let's do an angle. So opposite sides have to be equal. So 5y has to be equal to 25. So y has to be equal to 5 degrees. I also know that consecutive angles are supplementary. So 5x plus 25 has to be equal to 180. All right, let's grab our calculator. So 180 minus 25 is 155 divided by 5. So my x comes out to be equal to 31 degrees. Okay, last one we're going to do together. You remember, this is a parallelogram, so you got those nice vertical angles. I'm marking what's congruent, so that means I can say that 2x equals 30 degrees. So x has to be equal to 15. I can also say that x plus y equals 24. Oh no, that's two variables, but I know what x is. So I'm just going to do a little algebra here. 5, 4, 9 degrees. And that's kind of how you work these problems. So you're going to flip over the next side. You're going to do these problems. One thing I do need to point out to you, this little angle right there is 30 degrees, which means the entire angle is 30 plus 25. So this angle is 25, this angle is 30. Together, they're 55. That's what you need to know to finish the problem up. Okay, so if you missed day 14, there is day 14. Now let's take a quick look at day 15. All right, so here is day 15. So rectangles are a special type of quadrilateral. So all those properties I just talked about, the diagonals bisecting each other, the opposite sides being congruent, that's all still true for rectangles. So let's take a look at the special properties that just go with rectangles. So here are the properties we talked about just moments ago. Opposite sides are parallel. Of course, it's a quadrilateral. Opposite angles are congruent. Of course, it's a parallelogram. Opposite sides are congruent. Of course, it's a parallelogram. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Of course, it's a parallelogram. Diagonals bisect each other. Absolutely, it's a parallelogram. What do you get for being a rectangle? All 4 angles are right angles. And the diagonals are now congruent. In other words, they're also not only bisecting each other, they're equal. So let's slide down and let's try some problems that refer to our rectangle. So our first one says that this segment right here is 36 and this segment is 2x minus 4. Well, diagonals bisect each other, which means this is congruent to this. So I can say that 2x minus 4 has to be equal to 36. So that means x is going to be equal to 20. Yeah, that's all you got to do. You're just using the properties we got yesterday or earlier and now these, okay? BE is 6y plus 2 and CE is 4y plus 6. Well, since your diagonals are the same length, that means all of these little segments, so this one, this one, this one, and this one, they're all equal to each other. So I can say 6y plus 2 equals 4y plus 6. So that's 2y equals 4. So y, of course, must be equal to 2. Okay, I'm going to erase off my picture here. Okay, so now my picture's all clean. All right, now this one says BC, so that's this side over here, and AD. Well, it's a quadrilateral, BC, AD. Those have to be equal to each other. So I'm just going to kind of move over here, and I'm going to say 24 has to be equal to 5y minus 1. So that must mean that 25 equals 5y, so y must be equal to 5. Done. Okay, so that's a whole bunch of side lengths. Let's talk some angles. So I'm going to scoot down to my work in just a moment, but first I want to look at the picture with you. Let me do a little erasing here. Okay, all erased. So BEA. So BEA. So that is 62 degrees. And they want me to find BAC. Okay. So remember, you're getting 2 equal triangles on each side. So that must mean that this is equal to this. How do I know that? Those are congruent. Opposite sides are congruent. That's that isosceles triangle properties. So I'm just going to take my 180. I'm going to subtract the 62 degrees for my apex angle, using that vocabulary, and divide by 2. And that's going to tell me either of those 2 angles because they're going to be the same. So 180 minus 62, divide by 2, 59 degrees for each of those angles. Okay, again, I know it's an isosceles triangle because all of those little segments are equal to each other. Okay, let me erase off my picture again so I can write on it a little more. Okay, this one says AED. So we're talking about this angle right here in the picture and BEC. Okay, those guys are vertical angles, and of course we know vertical angles are equal. So let's go down here and let's do that. So that will mean that 12x has to be equal to 10x plus 20. So that's 2x equals 20. So of course, x is going to be equal to 10. But my problem asked me to find AED. And I know that AED is equal to 12 times x, so that's 12 times 10, so it must be 120 degrees. Okay, now I gotta go up and erase my picture again. So all erased. All right, now let's take a look at this one. This one says BD. So BD is that whole diagonal right there. And AC, that's the other diagonal. Well, we know those. That's the other diagonal, so these two right here, sorry about that. Diagonals are equal when you're talking about a rectangle, so all I have to do is say 8y minus 4 is equal to 7y plus 3, so y is going to be equal to 7. Oh, but that's not what it asked for. It asked for BD. Well, I know BD is equal to 8 times 7 minus 4. Okay, I'm just going to put it in my calculator in case I'm not 100% sure. That'll also give you just a moment to make sure your math is right. Oh, it's 52. Okay, let me go up here and erase my picture just a couple more times, and we're all done with our notes. Okay, so it wants angle, and I'll show you my work in just a moment, DBC. So we're talking about this angle that's right there and angle ACB. Okay, so that's angle right there. Okay, now I know those two angles are equal because they're opposite two equal sides of a triangle. So I'm going to set them equal to each other. Now I'm going to scoot this over here and I'm going to go over to here because I want to have enough room. So I know that 10x is got to be equal to 4x squared minus 6. Now that's a quadrilateral, so I'm sorry, a quadratic. So I know I've got to get that equal to 0. Now if you were in class, I would have asked you the following question. How can I solve a quadratic? And somebody said to me, you could factor it. Yeah, I could. What if I don't feel like factoring? I could do quadratic formula. What if I don't feel like doing quadratic formula? I could do completing the square. What if I don't feel like doing any of those three? I could graph it and look where it crosses the x-axis. But I'm going to try factoring because it does factor nicely. Notice that all the terms divide by 2. So I'm going to divide everything by 2. All right, so in order to factor this, you multiply the 2 times the 3. That's 6. I need factors of 6, one odd, one even, that are going to actually, no, they're both going to be negative. So let's see, that'll be a -2 and a -3. So when I go to factor this, I will have 2x let's see, what do I got here? 3. Oh, I think I'm gonna have to do a little more work. Let me fix it up real nicely here. I'm now realizing that I gotta show you how I'm getting my answer. So that's 2x squared minus 2x minus 3x plus 3. Okay, so the first pair, I can factor out a 2x, leaving me with x plus 1. The second pair, I can factor out a -3, leaving me with x plus 1. So that is, don't need that parentheses there, x plus 1 and 2x minus 3. Okay, so when I solve this, I'm going to get x equals -1. And I'm going to get x equals 3/2, which is about 1.5. Okay, now in order to figure out which of these is the right answer, because only one of them is going to be right, you literally need to put this back in the original problem and try and evaluate it. Now, if I put a -1 in right here, I'm going to get a negative angle measurement. So that's an extraneous answer. Instead, I want to use this as my value. So if I do that, I'm going to end up with measure of my angle as being 4 times 1.5 squared minus 6, and that's going to end up being 15 degrees. And that's the right answer. All right, let's go to our last one. So our very last one says, write BD in terms of y. That means that when you do this problem, you will have a y left at the end. It's not going to be equal to 7, 52, 2. It's going to have a y in it. So don't freak out when you still have a y in your problem. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's figure out what segments they're talking about in this picture. Okay, so they want AB and they want BC. Okay, now if you look at this, you have just created a right triangle. How do I know it's a right triangle? It's a rectangle, class. Rectangles have a right angle. So I'm going to do Pythagorean theorem. So if I do AB squared plus BC squared, that should be equal to AC squared. Okay, so here's what I know. This is 6y squared, and that's 8y squared, and that's equal to AC squared. Okay, so 36y squared plus 64y squared equals AC squared. So that's 100y squared equals AC squared. Now, if you were in class, I would ask you, how do you get rid of a square? And you would, of course, tell me square root both sides. So that means AC has to be equal to 10y. Notice my final answer is in terms of y, and that's what they wanted. Now, what if you're saying to me, but they ask for BD? Well, the diagonals are the same length. So if I know that one, I know this one. It's also 10y. And that's how you work a problem like that. Okay, so looking on to the next page, you are going to do properties of rectangles, and that is going to finish up the homework stuff that you need to know. Please draw a picture for this one. If you see the picture, it's really easy to do. If you don't draw yourself a picture of a rectangle, it's going to be a little harder. And that's kind of it. That's both lessons all put together. I will see you all back here on Monday, and good luck to everybody on any EOCs that you have or AP exams. Good luck.